Afternoon, all. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. We'll give it just one more moment for participation numbers to level off, and then we'll get started. All right, I think that participation numbers have slowed down, so I think we can go ahead and get started. Welcome to today's Clinical Genomics Career Panel, where we're chatting with physician clinicians about their career paths, how they ended up where they are, and how they use genetics in their regular work. My name is Jules Savat. I'll be moderating for today. As a reminder, all of our webinars in this series are recorded so that folks can watch these after today. And we've had 3 webinars completed to date. All of those are posted on the ClinGen YouTube channel. Welcome to review those. The QR code on the screen will take you to them if you'd like to review them. We have 2 more upcoming webinars next week and the following week, focusing on research development and other opportunities, and then stepping stone careers or roles that help individuals gain experiences and knowledge before moving on to medical school, genetic counseling school, etc. So we today, how this will go, we'll start by asking our panelists to introduce themselves, and then we will take questions from you all. Some of you provided questions as part of registration. Thank you for sharing those. You're also welcome to provide questions during the panel using the Q&A box, should be at the bottom of your screen, in the middle or so. And you can upvote questions that you would like to see addressed. So if someone else puts a question in there you would like to see it addressed as well, feel free to upvote, and we will do our best to get to those. Before we get started in asking our panelists lots of questions, we often like to start with a quick poll for those who are attending. The poll has just 2 questions, and I'm going to ask Maddie to go ahead and launch it if you don't mind. The first question asking if you're currently a student, so getting a sense of where you are in your journey, and how familiar you are with physician careers with a focus on genetics. We'll leave it open for just another moment or 2. All right, so it looks like for the folks on the call, we have a good mix in terms of where they are in education. So some are undergrad, some masters, some not currently a student. And in terms of familiarity, also a spread in how familiar they are with physician careers. So some being moderately familiar, some not at all familiar with this career path. So if you're looking to learn more, you are in the right place. So before we start with our panelists and asking them questions, we also wanted to give a bit of background about the pathway to becoming a physician and specifically a clinical geneticist. So I'll start by saying genetics is relevant in many medical specialties, more than we even listed on this slide. But genetics is increasingly being used across specialties of medicine, used in primary care, in neurology, cardiology, oncology. So lots of places where genetics is important for caring for patients. And we have a number of physicians with different clinical areas, clinical expertise on the call today. But one of the questions that we get most frequently is, how do I become a clinical geneticist? What's the pathway in terms of education, in terms of residency? So we did want to start with just a few slides on that topic before we get to our panelists. So clinical geneticists are physicians who care for patients in clinical settings and often carry out clinical or translational research. So both clinical care as well as research. Geneticists hold an American Board of Medical Genetics and Genomics certification in the specialty of clinical genetics and genomics. They have broad training in the evaluation, diagnosis, and management and treatment of inherited conditions, and they often care for patients across the age spectrum, from birth until adulthood. Because of the wide-ranging effects of inherited conditions, clinical geneticists work with many other medical disciplines, many that were just on that prior slide. In terms of becoming a clinical geneticist in the United States, what this looks like is first undergraduate training, a bachelor's degree, really in anything, as long as the individual is taking the course requirements that they will need for medical school. So for some folks, this means being a biology major, others a psychology, some might be a poli-sci major, but get all of those prerequisites under their belt. They then go to a medical school, either DO or MD program, and while in medical school, apply for a residency through the match. That next step is that postgraduate training residency. And for those who become clinical geneticists, the requirement is at least one residency year in a primary specialty, followed by 2 years of medical genetics and genomics residency. There are a couple of paths to get there. So some programs are a combined program where they provide that residency in that primary specialty and then shift you over to that clinical genetics and genomics residency. Others, you start a primary residency and then apply to a genetics residency after completing that at least 1 year, but often more time. So the path kind of looks like this, a couple of different ways to get there in terms of residency to ultimately be able to sit for those boards, become a clinical geneticist. So some that combined, where they combine that primary specialty as well as the genetics, others starting in a primary, moving to medical genetics, and then becoming board eligible. Because there are a few different paths, there also means that it's variable in terms of the length of training and number of years. So maybe at least 3, sometimes 8 total years to get to that full training for the pieces that the residency requires. And then after residency, after graduating, completing that board exam, the majority of clinical geneticists work in public non-commercial institutions, so academic medical centers, universities, government agencies. But there are some who work for genetic testing companies or private healthcare services, consult as well. So a couple of pathways even after residency. I hope you get to know more about paths to becoming a physician clinician that uses genetics. Again, clinical geneticists are just one group of physician clinicians who use genetics in the work that they do. Certainly is used in other specialties as well. So hope you get to learn more from our panel today of their paths, how they got where they are, the work that they do, but we also like to leave you with some resources for after today. So the American College of Medical Genetics and Genomics, or ACMG, allows student membership for free, and they have a number of resources and more information for those who might be interested in this path towards clinical genetics. So in addition to today's discussion, they have YouTube videos, written resources around this topic of how do I become a clinical geneticist? How do I get there? So point you to those after this afternoon. So with that, we'll turn to our panel. We are joined by, I think, 4 at this point, physician clinicians who are willing to share their experience with us. So we'll start with introductions from each of them. So I'd love to hear, I'll call on you each individually, who you are, where you work, what you do. Perhaps since we just went through residency certification at a high level, you could talk a little bit more about the certification that you have, what boards you took, and just wanted to get to know you a bit. So my Linda, you are first on my screen, so I think I'll start with you.
I'm probably the most atypical. I don't know yet, but we'll find out. I was adding up how many years I went to school after you put those slides up, and it actually is a little closer to 19 for me. But so I'm a family medicine physician, and I first actually did my bachelor's degree in cell biology at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and then I did my PhD in molecular biology at the University of Utah. And after my PhD, I went on to medical school, where I intended actually to become a medical geneticist and fell in love with primary care. And so I instead have spent my career trying to integrate genetics into family medicine. So I'm board certified in family medicine. And in terms of additional training or certification beyond that, and my PhD, I have also completed the City of Hope intensive course more than a decade ago now. So I feel kind of OG at this point, but yeah, so that's been my pathway so far. I work at the University of Pittsburgh and UPMC in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I run a primary care precision medicine clinic. That's a multidisciplinary clinic with phenomenal genetic counselors and a pharmacy team as well.
Thanks, my Linda. Asha, you're next on my screen.
Hey everyone, my name is Asha Talati. I'm a physician in maternal fetal medicine and clinical genetics and genomics, and I work at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where I'm an assistant professor. In terms of how I got here, I started my career path in college, like many people. I went to Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio, where I was actually a religious studies major, which is quite different than, a typical scientific career path. Yes, I did have to take, a lot of science preliminary courses to be prepared for medical school. But I really strongly feel that having a liberal arts background has really helped to shape me into who I am right now as a clinician and scientist. After undergraduate, I went to medical school. I ended up staying on at Case Western in Cleveland, Ohio. And during that time, I really fell in love with obstetrics and gynecology, which was not what I expected, but I'm so glad I did it. So after that, I did a residency in obstetrics and gynecology and learned to become a surgeon. And I am so grateful for those skills because I still use all of them today. And following that time, I worked at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill for 2 years as a general OBGYN while I got my master's in clinical research. This is a little bit different from a typical career path. I chose to do that because I really wanted to integrate research into my career, and I felt like I needed to gain more skills to do that. And so that's the reason that I chose this additional training for a master's in clinical research while I was working. I then did a fellowship in maternal fetal medicine and clinical genetics and genomics. MFM is one of the unique specialties in which you can actually have a combined fellowship with clinical genetics and genomics. So it ends up being a 4-year program after residency where we combine maternal fetal medicine training, which is high-risk obstetrics, taking care of moms with conditions that make a pregnancy significantly higher risk than other pregnancies, and learning how to take care of them both before they deliver and then during delivery, which can be complicated, and after. But then also with the clinical genetics training, I got to really understand how to not only take care of a mom with a genetic condition, but then also to offer genetic counseling services during the pregnancy, create a plan for genetic diagnosis either during pregnancy or after as a big part of my training. So that combined training was 4 years after residency. And after, with all of those trainings, I took board certification in OBGYN, maternal fetal medicine, and clinical genetics and genomics, which sounds intimidating, but honestly, they're so integrated that a lot of it goes hand in hand and made a lot of sense together. Finally, I practiced. And so my clinical practice right now is taking care of moms that have rare genetic conditions in pregnancy that can make their pregnancy significantly higher risk. And it ends up being a really phenomenal career where I get to take care of not just moms who have a genetic condition, but truly their entire families when their children might be at higher risk of that same disease, or they're making decisions to help shape their families by using genetic information. And so it is truly a niche specialty, and it's really awesome that I get to take care of patients who really sort of want integrated services during their pregnancy and reproductive care. So that's about half of my time. And then the other half of my time, I do research. Coming full circle to that liberal arts background, a lot of my research is looking at the bioethical implications of pursuing prenatal diagnosis and how we can more responsibly and ethically and equitably implement prenatal diagnostic strategies. And so again, that comes way back to my background in religious studies and using a lot of those sort of basic sociological inquiry tools that I learned then to really apply that to my clinical career now. So yeah, I'm excited to be here, and please feel free to ask any questions about OBGYN and maternal fetal medicine and genetics because it's a really cool specialty.
Thanks for sharing your path, Asha, and where you've ended up, the work you're doing. Really useful to hear. I have many questions for you, so excited for that portion of today. Ada, you're next on my screen.
Okay, so I thought I had a long and winding road, but it's not as long and winding as yours, Asha. And also, in response to, before I give you my whole story, Melinda, I think of genetics as family medicine for sick families. That's what I think our field is. So, okay, let's see. I'm Ada Hamish, and I am a professor of genetics and the clinical director at Johns Hopkins. And I'm a lifer here ever since internship. So it's almost 40 years, but it's a secret. Anyway, let's see. I went undergrad to Wesleyan University in Connecticut, and I double majored in biology and history. And then I went to Georgetown for medical school, which was an interesting experience. And then I knew I wanted to do peds. I knew I wanted kids even before I was absolutely certain I wanted to do medicine. So I went into pediatrics. And this is where it gets a little circuitous. So I grew up outside DC, and I thought I wanted to do policy for a living. That's what I thought I wanted. And so at the end of my peds residency, I was I got an MPH, because you need an MPH if you want to do policy for a living. And I had a pediatric intensive care fellowship lined up. And what I thought I wanted to do was study end of life decision making, and basically be a sheep in wolf's clothing. That was the goal. And in that 1 year of my the MPH degree, I realized that I didn't want to do pediatric intensive care, because while I didn't fully recognize it in residency, this is a take-home message for everyone listening. The most valuable part of my everyday life is those connections, long-term, like decades, generations of connections with families. And you can't fully appreciate that as a resident, even if you have a continuity clinic. It's 3 years. It's like, you blink and it's gone. But I realized sort of in intensive care that basically, whether it goes well or goes bad, there's someplace else in 3 days. And I thought I wanted more. And then I had no idea. So I backed into genetics. I didn't know quite what I wanted to do. I didn't have an organ system I liked more than any other. I like them all. And genetics was desperately seeking fellows in those days. I'm old enough that genetics was a fellowship after you finished whatever residency you wanted to do. You could still do any residency, but then you did a fellowship in genetics. So in any case, I thought, well, I like the combination of like the critical care aspect plus the longitudinal care. So I said, this sounds like a great idea. And I am so glad that this field chose me, because you cannot be bored in this field. It is, if you're bored, there is something terribly wrong with you. We can talk about it offline. But there's no 2 minutes that are the same. I have a full slate of patients scheduled for a day, and they have 8 alleged diagnoses. They never have those. If they have those, it's somebody I've been following for 10 years. They didn't bother to tell me they were 9 weeks pregnant. There's always a surprise, right? Every day. So in any case, it's a great, great field. I did the 3 years. I guess in the 3 years in genetics, I did a combination of clinical genetics and biochemical genetics, and I took those boards. So I have PEDS boards, clinical genetics boards, and biochemical genetics boards. I let the PEDS boards drop probably 5 or 6 years ago, because I'm really doing genetics with most of my time. And I think that's my long and winding road. But I do, what I spend my time is, I'm in theory, about 20% clinical. We're down a couple of people, so I'm closer to 50% clinical. About 20 to 30% of my time, I'm the clinical director, so I'm doing all the administrative stuff that keeps a organization that's part of this organization running. And then the rest of my time, I work on, I'm the director for OMIM, which is Online Medical Inheritance of Man. It's a big database of genes and genetic disorders. I work with ClinGen. I work with anybody that needs my help. That's my life, I think.
Thanks, Ada. Brian?
Yeah, hey everyone. So I'm Brian Chioda. I'm a geneticist. I practice at the University of Utah currently. And my path has been, I started growing up in San Diego, and I went to UC San Diego for undergrad as a bio major, so more typical path, and then went to medical school in the Caribbean at St. George's University. With that, I went into pediatrics. I think for me, it was always important working with children. I just find it way more enjoyable and rewarding to work with children. So that was sort of something I always had in the back of my mind. And I had an interest in genetics as well. But I think I've realized, not just me, but a lot of people don't really know that genetics is even a specialty for quite a long time. So even the start of medical school, I did not realize genetics was something I could even practice. I just knew that I liked genetics and I did well in the course, and I was more interested in it. But once I got to my clinicals is when I started working, doing some of my pediatric rotations, and I found some geneticists, and I thought, this is just the most amazing field. It's so interesting. You're not a single organ specialist, so you work with the entire body. You see all sorts of presentations, but you're also not a generalist where, as a pediatrician, I didn't really prefer, seeing kids for colds and talking about antibiotics and vaccines all day and the troubles that come with that. Ada had said, it's every day is interesting. And so I really caught on really quick just after doing a quick rotation during my medical school training. I did pediatric residency in New Jersey, and I did the full 3 years rather than the combined, and then went on to do my medical genetics and genomics training at Baylor and Texas Children's in Houston, and then did the additional year for medical biochemical genetics. So that's where I deal with more of the inborn errors of metabolism and types of metabolic disorders like that. And after that, took my position here at the University of Utah, where I'm currently an assistant professor. I spend about 40% of my time doing clinical work, where I see patients in clinic, but also deal with on-call situations and inpatient conditions. I'm in charge of the newborn screen for some of the surrounding states as well as Utah. So that's a big public health program. I do also have my MPH and have an interest in public health. So being part of the newborn screen has been really amazing, because that program has just helped so many people. I'm happy to talk more about that if we have the opportunity. And I also spend time with my trainees. So I'm a program director for medical biochemical fellows, and I do some teaching and graduate courses. And then a lot of time is also spent doing clinical trials. So investigating new drug and different therapies for patients that have primarily metabolic disorders as well.
Thank you. So Mylinda, I think you started by saying you thought you'd be the oddball, but I think I'm hearing lots of different paths to where you are, which is really wonderful, and appreciate you all starting to share those. Hearing you describe your work and all that you do, I'm thinking, my goodness, when do they sleep? What does a day in the life look like for them? And it is a common question we get from folks attending this as well. So I know each day might be a little bit different with all of the things you have going on, but could you give us a sense of a typical day or typical days, typical week, what that might be? Ada, go ahead. I see you chatting. Why don't we start with you?
No, I thought Mylinda was starting. I'm sorry. So there isn't a typical day, although there's usually a clinic day where I'm booked in clinic and I'm stationed there seeing patients all day long, unless of course I'm also on call, in which case I might have to run someplace else to see somebody else. But in principle, I'm in clinic. Other days, it's a combination of meetings, either in vivo or by Zoom. I write for OMIM. I make decisions about what needs to happen. I go to endless meetings about, staffing, billing, all that kind of stuff. I don't recommend it, but anyway, it takes up the time. And then there's always, but in terms of this field, in the clinical practice, basically there's two things you have to be comfortable with if you want to be a geneticist. It's the best field in the world, but you have to be comfortable with uncertainty, because that's all we have. And even what we think we know is wrong. Okay, just know it, just own it. It's true. And then the other thing is, because there's 8,000 conditions that we're responsible for, right? It's not otitis media and a vaccine, which would be nice. We could own it. We could really know it. We are about 15 at every day, at any time of the day, you have to be about 15 minutes from expertise. So you're confronted with something, you look at it, you have to figure it out, you have to read up quick and go in the room and give information. So both of those things are things that are, I think, essential. You have to have those skills and be comfortable with them to be a clinical geneticist.
Thanks for that, Ada. So no 2 days are the same, but good skills to have for each of those days in clinic. Mylinda?
Yeah, I would say the same. And I would also say that no 2 years are the same in your career, building off what Ada just said, right? Like, I think all of our careers have evolved immensely, depending on the stage of training and where we are. So I currently also only see patients 1 day a week, and the rest of the time I'm doing research, and supporting other research projects and teaching, writing grants. I've been finishing a grant all morning today. So I think that what I love, I think about genetics, and one of the things that drew me to this is that diversity, right? And Ada, like you said, the primary care element of genetics, every patient is a different age, every disorder is completely different. Everything happens in the context of families and lives, and life and environment and all the things that are happening. And so if you really love that, and you love that everything is perhaps unpredictable and changing from day to day, this is a great field. If you really love predictability and you want every day to be the same, this might be a larger challenge. Plus the science, as Ada was saying, is just changing literally hourly. And so what you thought you knew yesterday is different tomorrow. But for those who really love research, I think that's actually really exciting, because we're constantly teaching ourselves and each other on an ongoing basis.
So I would say that my week looks a little bit different, by nature of being in a surgical specialty as well. But I think that's one of the things that I really love about being a geneticist that also is in a hands-on and surgical specialty. So my typical work week is 5 days, like everyone else. And very occasionally with my practice now, I work weekends. And that is an important thing to consider with OBGYN, because babies come at all times, including nights and weekends. And certainly for all geneticists, emergencies happen at all times. Biochemical patients, like Brian's patients, are more often than not coming in at night and on weekends. And so, it is an important thing that to consider, as we all have lives and families and important other parts of our life. But I think my job is really manageable and really does allow me to still be there for my family and my kids the way I would want to be. With that said, my work week, Monday through Friday, is kind of doing different things every day, which, like you've already heard, I think we all like variety in our jobs, which is one of the big things that has sort of driven us to our field. About 2 to 3 days of the week, I could be doing a variety of clinical activities. That will include, some days I'm in our ultrasound unit. That's where we're doing ultrasounds for pregnant people, looking for different sort of conditions that can present or we can diagnose on ultrasound, and then offering prenatal diagnostic services. So I do procedures like amniocentesis or chorionic villus sampling, both transcervically and transabdominally. Sometimes it could include some procedures, like, for example, a fetal reduction procedure for people who have multiples, such as triplets or quadruplets or twins. Sometimes that could just include genetic counseling that is usually paired with a team of fabulous genetic counselors, but it's sort of explaining what I think a diagnosis is based on what I see on ultrasound. Other days I could physically be on labor and delivery, which I think is still a really fun way to keep all of my skills up. So I do C-sections and vaginal deliveries still. And a lot of times I'm caring for my own patients. Sometimes, as Brian's patients get older and they decide to have families, they end up coming to see me. And so then I take care of our patients who have inborn errors of metabolism during labor, and then deliver their babies. And then we rush that newborn screening back to Brian. So we can take care of those entire families. So that's still a really fun thing to do some days. Other days I'm in clinic, and my clinical days when I'm seeing patients in clinic is often going to be consultations. How should we think about pregnancy when you have a genetic condition? How should we take care of you? That would be different from a patient who doesn't have a genetic condition during pregnancy. What are your options for screening the baby or screening the baby after birth? And so that ends up being a lot of my sort of clinical practice. The other days where I'm not seeing patients or I'm not doing procedures or reading ultrasounds is when I focus on research, teaching, and then some of the meetings that Ada mentioned, which aren't the most fun parts of my job, but at the same time are really important, because I feel like as has been mentioned, genetics is changing so rapidly, and it's changing the way that we're taking care of people and giving really new opportunities for people to kind of improve their health and the health of their families. And so that research and administration and teaching portions that we do, that we all love, really is awesome to drive the science forward and to really change the way that people can be healthy and in new ways. And so that's kind of 2 days of my week, which are a little bit less hands-on and less exciting, but still really important for my overall career.
Thanks so much for that, Asha. Brian, how about you?
Yeah, mine is pretty similar, so I won't go into too much detail, but I do one a day of clinic a week, only metabolic patients. And just to emphasize more about the clinic, I mean, we at least have more time with our patients, which is one thing that I love about clinical work, is that, you know, my patients, I spend a whole hour with them and I really get to talk and connect with the patients and get to know their families. And it's never feels like it's so rushed that as like I'm just trying to get the information and get out of the clinic to see the next one. So one thing that I'd emphasize about the regular work schedule is that we actually get to spend time with our patients and we counsel them, and we have a lot of support too. We have genetic counselors that work with us, nurse practitioners, all sorts of other ancillary staff and support. The rest of the time, like everyone else, is just spent lots of meetings, being specialized in metabolics. I deal with emergencies as well. So these are patients that have genetic conditions that they can get very, very sick very, very quickly. And so those emergencies, you know, sometimes I'm on call and I'm directly the one responsible for them, but other times, you know, patients will just reach out to me. And, you know, I'm always trying to help them when I'm able to, because these are patients that really need support. But it's still a pretty regular Monday through Friday thing, unless we're on call. I'm on call, in which case, you know, there are emergency calls that you get at different times of the day. But yeah, they're all manageable and enjoyable, and I am always happy to be there to help families. And I think they really appreciate what we have to offer because they know that it is a rare specialty. And most of our patients come from, you know, a long history of seeing several doctors, of not knowing, you know, nobody can figure out what's wrong with them, why they have these problems. And a lot of times people will just dismiss them or say that, you know, parents, by the time they get to us, they think they're going crazy because nobody's there to help them. So by the time they get to us, you know, they're really appreciative. And that's another thing that I really enjoy about this job.
Thanks, Brian. So the folks on the call are thinking about career paths. So I'm curious what advice you'd give someone who's thinking about becoming a physician, and then maybe a specialty, maybe clinical genetics, maybe a specialty that incorporates genetics. What would you suggest for them in terms of the process of getting there?
I'll jump in. I would say, so if you know you want to be a physician, you need excellent grades. I'm sorry that that's still the case, but that is what you need. And you need good MCAT scores. And I don't know that this in any way reflects the skills you actually need to be a good and caring physician, but you do need that skill set. So I think that is essential to get you in the door. It's interesting that once you are accepted to a medical school, unless there is something horribly wrong with you, you will be an MD at the end of it. Okay, like you just will be. And the vast majority of people pass the medical boards, the three-step medical boards. You know, you have to study. Yeah, you have to study, but you'll pass them. So the getting in is the hard part in terms of that step. In terms of additional training, you know, I really think it's, so when I advise medical students on what to do in terms of a primary specialty, meaning other than genetics, so not as a primary, but if you're going to do peds or OB or medicine or family medicine or med peds or whatever, it's a gut level thing. It's actually not one you can think about that much. It's you're going to rotate through everything as a third year medical student, and something is going to be, this is where I belong. These are my people. These are my patients. This is where I belong. And I don't recommend overthinking it at all. Just go with your gut. In terms of genetics, whatever if you can do straight up genetics, which is, I mean, if you want to do prenatal, you need to have done OB. So that's the only thing where you absolutely have to have done something else if you want to take care of pregnant women and pregnant people and their newborn infants and the fetus, you need to do OB. If you, beyond that, it's birth, to death, and you could be 80. I mean, I take care of 80-year-olds. So it's a full, you will take care of everyone. And the family is really your unit once you get to know people. Obviously, initially it's a person who presents, but the family is your unit. So I think you can do whatever makes you happy beforehand. I think just to follow up on something Brian was saying, other than I'm also a biochemical geneticist. So that is usually the Friday night in the middle of the night of a holiday weekend. Okay. So that's nights and weekends. And certainly MFM, people are born when they want to be born and not the day they're due, right? So that's unpredictable. The rest of genetics is really more a 9-to-5 job. And obviously you're going to be working differently, but your patients, they're going to, whatever's wrong with them is going to be wrong with them during normal working hours, and they'll come and see you in clinic like a normal person. So that part of it is actually quite controllable and not as chaotic as other aspects. Now, obviously I love the chaos, or I wouldn't be a biochemical geneticist. So I like my middle of the night on, the Friday of a long weekend, although I'm getting a little old for it. But anyway, so back to training. So, and then the beyond that, it depends, but just the hard part is getting into med school. That's the hardest part. And it doesn't matter if you want to study religion, study religion. If you want to study, medieval languages, study medieval languages. Just take all the prereqs and do very, very well in them. No pressure. You don't need to have done research. I mean, if you think you want to do research, it helps, right? But you don't need that to get into medical school. They really are looking for much more diverse classes. It's not that everyone's a biology major who's done, 2 years in the lab and XYZ university. Go do what you want, do it well, and enjoy it, right? Because you'll be working very hard the next few years. But that's the hard part. Getting in is the hard part.
Sounds like that first hurdle.
Go ahead. Oh, I was just going to say, I think just building off of that, however, I want to say is I think we're entering a new era as well, especially with respect to genetics and genomics, where nurse practitioners, PAs, there are more and more alternative pathways to having a career in genetics than I think there ever were before. And so I think thinking about genetic counseling, thinking about nurse practitioner school, PA school, it doesn't all have to be medical school. And I know that we all chose really long and complex biochemical pathways, but I think that there's lots of ways to get to this type of point and to have this type of relationship with patients and the subject matter. In terms of other things that I think are important to do in training, I'm listening to Brian, and it's just really fun for me to reminisce because I did my PhD at the University of Utah, and I would set up my experiments, and I'd run over to Children's Hospital, and I'd attend as much genetics and metabolic clinic as I possibly could. And I had the most phenomenal mentors there who really inspired and motivated me to go into this pathway. Everyone from genetic counselors all the way to the medical geneticists and the biochemical geneticists that were there were just amazing. So shadowing, I think, is hugely important. And you just have to find the people. We love having learners come. I don't know about the rest of you, but I think we all love having learners come because we want to share our passion and excitement for what we're passionate and excited about to the future. And so just don't be afraid to just randomly reach out and cold email us or stop by our departmental offices and leave messages any way you can to come in and get that hands-on experience. And I'll just tell you one really fast story and pass it on. But one of my very first times that I was in metabolic clinic in Utah shadowing, a family came in with all 3 kids had the same metabolic condition. And I'm sitting there listening, and they're taking the history. And all of a sudden I just saw one of the kids like make this motion, and I instinctively put my hands out, and he vomited all over my hands. And after that, everyone around me said, you are definitely meant to be in this career. Like, this is the right place for you. You didn't panic and freak out and run the other direction. And I think those are actually important things. And I'm sure that Asha, as a surgeon, could share the same types of connections.
I will say that my first time in an operating room, I passed out. And so I walked away saying, maybe I shouldn't be a surgeon. And now I do really tough surgeries all the time. So I actually, I don't mean to contradict, but what I mean to say is that I think, doors are constantly staying open for you in unique ways, and you may end up walking through them at different points in time. I agree with everything that everyone has said so far. And I think what I would love to add is that finding unique mentors is really, really an important part of this process too. I did not enter my career in medicine thinking I was going to become a geneticist. In fact, it probably dawned on me later in my career than it did for a lot of the other folks on the panel. I walked in wanting to be an OBGYN, and I realized really quickly that my passion lies with the sickest patients, and that when I am with them, that is sort of when I come alive in a unique way. And I can get past, fainting in the OR. There's a lot of things you learn to do to help get you past that so that you can be there and take care of them. And that's what really filled my cup. And then as I sort of dug into that a little more, I realized that I like the gray. I like the uncertainty, and I like, kind of sitting there with that with patients and helping them make decisions. And more often than not, that came with people who had rare disease or who had a disease that we just couldn't put our finger on completely. And that really drove me to genetics. But I would be completely remiss to say that if I didn't have a phenomenal team of mentors that were not just physicians, but also genetic counselors, who really saw that I had potential in genetics and who made me see the unique opportunities in genetics, I really wouldn't be here today if it weren't for them. So I would really encourage you guys to find different mentors for different parts of your life that really listen to you, that spark a passion for you, that can help you see what brings you alive, and can kind of guide you in the right steps. And that doesn't have to be someone you work with directly. It doesn't have to be someone who you see every day in the lab. I think I had different mentors for different parts of my life. I have a sort of personal and career development mentor. I have a mentor who I think really is able to do work-life balance in a good way that I want to embody and do the same thing with when it comes to how I am at home with my kids. I have my favorite genetic counselors that I like to sit and listen to because I'm like, I want to counsel like them. They're really good at this. And so I think that having, different mentors for different parts of your life and your job can really help you find your path, and whether that's being a physician or another career in genetics. But I think that was a really big piece for me.
Brian, I want to hear your advice, but Asha, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question before we move to Brian. How does one find mentors? I think it's a question we get asked a lot of how do you build that network? How do you find those people to help you figure out what fits, what doesn't fit? So could you say a few words about that? And then Brian, I will come back because I want to hear your advice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really good question, and it was an important question. I think one thing that I didn't realize until later in my career is that people really want to talk about how they got to where they did and how they developed the skills and passions that they did. And so one thing I would encourage you guys to do in any, either shadowing environment or rotation environment, or even class that you have, is to actually just find a time to go to office hours or to set up a meeting and to say, I really like what you do. How did you get to do what you do? And if you feel like that path resonates with you, then say, you know what, I'm really interested in following a similar path. What opportunities can we create together to spend some more time together, whether that is research or that is just having professional development meetings and having something on the calendar once every few months. I really like you. I want to work with you. And honestly, we all love to hear that. We don't hear it enough. So, feel free to cold call and email us, just like my Linda said. We all want to raise up the next generation of geneticists, and there's so much knowledge and learning and development going around in genetics that we need more people to do the work that we do and share in this effort and be a part of this sort of revolution of care that's happening. And so, yeah, I mean, once you find the right people, pull them up with you, you know, and we're all ready to do that. That's the one thing I also noticed I want to say is that geneticists are the nicest people. They are absolutely the nicest people. And so, you know, I think you could really easily like put any sort of shyness aside, which was hard for me. I'm a bit of an introvert, but putting that aside and just saying, hey, like, you do really cool stuff. Can we talk about this? How did we get here? Let's talk about this.
Thanks for that.
Mhm.
Brian, what advice do you have for folks?
Yeah, I think everything has been said has been on point and great. And the part about getting into medical school, I don't know how to advise about that because that's a bit far removed. And that is definitely the barrier, I think, for a lot of people and the toughest part. But like Ada said, once you get into medical school, there's a very clear path that's very feasible. And the vast majority of people that make it to that into medical school will make it to become a physician. And the you know, for being a geneticist specifically, one thing that is nice is that it's not the most competitive residency or fellowship to obtain. And so there are a lot of spots that go unfilled every year. And so, you know, there is a lot of space available for more people. And we're constantly trying to encourage younger people to come into the field. It's actually something that we really need to do more of because the field is really growing so quickly, and that's where we realize that we just can't get enough people in, like MDs, into it. And that's where nurse practitioners, PAs, genetic counselors are really starting to fill those gaps, but there's still a huge need for MDs into the field. And like Asha was saying, you know, the culture of geneticists is just really amazing and inviting. You know, you can't say that about every specialty in medicine, and that's something that you pick up on when you go through your rotations. But I think the culture of geneticists is amazing, and it's also a really, I mean, relatively, it's a very small field. And so most of us know each other. If you go to a conference, you can, you know, going to a couple conferences and presenting a poster, like people will start to recognize you. People will start to know that you're interested in the field. And that's where if like you're applying, like really thinking about, I want to do a genetics fellowship or residency, you know, just showing that you're interested, like attending a conference, it's so easy to do. And present a poster. Like it's not that hard to get a poster, like a simple case report. Just talk to any mentor or geneticist that you know. We have so many cases that are just interesting, and you could easily get a poster and just showing up, and you'll meet all types of people. The organizations out there like the ACMG are so supportive of young people and getting them connected to different specialists around the area. You can, you know, they have different meetings where you can get together with, you know, meet new mentors or other people to offer advice. So there are so many ways to get connected, and it's a small community. So most of us know each other, and it's really just fun to be part of.
Thanks for that. Asha, go ahead.
Oh, and I just want to add, I think there's a lot of scholarship opportunities because I think all of us realize the value of kind of bringing people into a genetics career path early or developing that passion and fostering that interest. So looking into the ACMG Summer Scholars Program can be a really good way to early on find structured programs for shadowing. Like Brian mentioned, going to the ACMG meeting can be a really good way. There are other meetings that involve a lot of genetics. So for example, right now I'm at the International Society for Prenatal Diagnosis in Boston, and physically at this meeting, and I'm hiding in my hotel room right now, but all that to say, there are a lot of really cool meetings that really encourage and have scholarships for people who are undergrads or medical students or early career residents to come and attend the meeting, just through a really short and simple application.
Thanks for that. Really helpful breadcrumbs of sort of next things to think about, advice to take along the way. So appreciate it. I think Melinda and Brian, I heard both of you, and I think all of you, mention other genetics career paths. And of course, this panel is about trying to increase awareness of genetics career paths. We had a GC panel a couple of weeks ago, laboratory geneticists and staff last week. We have a research one coming up. I heard you all say about PAs and nurse practitioners being involved. And I know it's a Venn diagram of roles and responsibilities, but Could you maybe speak to how your roles differ from those other careers? Just to kind of highlight, where are those differences? Where are those similarities for folks who might be thinking, I want to do something in genetics. These all sound great. Where are some of the differentiating points? So whoever might want to speak to that.
While we're thinking about who wants to answer that question, the other role that hasn't been mentioned is dietitians. So dietitians are absolutely essential in biochemical genetics clinics. They have the closest relationship with the families and many times see patients more than the physician will. What are the differences? I think it very much depends on where you are. So in some places, a nurse practitioner or PA may be functioning as the physician in that group with kind of a remote supervision, not even, hands-on, they're really running the show because that's who's there. In other places, I'd say all of genetics, no matter how remote you are, is a team practice. It takes a village to figure things out, to figure out who's going to follow up, to get a prior authorization for a med, for, it's to follow up on a newborn screen and get everybody else. It's all a village. I think so. A genetic counselor doesn't touch people. So that's the main distinction from a genetic counselor and everybody else. Nurses, and there's also genetic nurses that aren't necessarily nurse practitioners. They're people who specialize in a nursing field and don't necessarily have that nurse practitioner field. PAs are very hands-on, making, taking care of patients, coordinating appointments, making sure that meds are being given. And so it sort of depends on, some are doing, say, I would say most of them are doing, except where they're the only person, which is in many places actually, but where they aren't that, they're doing sort of the things that get done every single day, kind of in more of a routine manner. So, lysosomal storage disease patients who need infusions, that kind of, sort of the same thing over and over again. Dietitians manage everybody with inborn errors and also assist in other clinics, for instance, in conditions where there's obesity as a feature or failure to thrive as a feature. They need dietitians as well to help with either losing or gaining the weight. So the difference is obviously how long a trajectory. I mean, this is the longest path, right? Being a physician is the longest path. You can get like a PA school is usually about 2 years. And then sometimes you need a little bit more time. It's not really a formal internship, but a little more training time for the specialty you're going to do, but it's much less. The difference is that sort of the buck stops here in terms of making sure things happen, that the team is built, that we fight with the, see my mode, with the administrators to make sure the team is supported and that we can do what we need to do to grow the field, to work with other specialties, that we're sort of the front end for that. But actually, there's also lots of good underneath stuff that happens. So it's important on both levels. The dietitians should all be talking to each other across a hospital healthcare system, for example. So I think those are some of the differences. I don't know if I answered them all, but that's my take.
You highlighted some great ones. Asha, I'd say surgery might be a differentiating factor for some specialties versus yours. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that is, I think that's a fair assessment for sure. Surgery and procedural parts definitely come to me. And that definitely did require that subspecialty training in order to get that. I would also say that I think in terms of my role is that I would consider myself sort of like the leader and the coordinator of the team when it comes to pregnancy. And so I think one thing that's sort of unique about my field is that although, the other clinicians on the call really are, holistically providing care for a patient or family across the lifespan, I usually am a specialist in only pregnancy. And so I really take care of people for a short period of time. But when they are with me, I am sort of the coordinator of all of that care and turn into their primary care provider while they're pregnant. And I also sort of turn into the team lead while I'm pregnant because I'm the only one who can really think uniquely about mom and baby as a unit and understand that complex physiology and how a genetic condition can change that complex physiology. And I think that's one thing I knew about myself. Like, I know I like, being in this niche. I like being an expert of one particular thing and not an expert of all things. And so I am really happy in my field because I get to stay in that focused area as opposed to thinking about different time points. And I do also like that I can only have the stress for 9 months in certain situations. And then beyond that time, that stress sort of dissipates to other patients or to other situations. So it is a little bit of a unique specialty aspect. But I think you might hear a lot of surgeons say that, where, you know, you like kind of dealing with one problem and you fix that problem. And that is kind of one of the unique aspects of pregnancy, is that that's a unique 9-month condition. We take care of that, the baby is eventually delivered, and then our goal is to have a happy, healthy family and follow up.
We're short on time. So my Linda and Brian, I might give my last question to you. You're welcome to punt to another panelist if you want, but I want to end with looking forward. And I'm curious how you see the field changing, evolving in the next 10 years. So yeah, either one of you who might want to tackle that.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely say from my perspective in family medicine, what I see really evolving, and what I think that my team and I are a part of the actual process of that evolving, is how genetics is becoming a tool in medicine and across medicine. And how do we prepare other clinicians who have not trained extensively in genetics, either formally or informally, to be able to utilize that tool in a way that's effective and safe, and advancing the care of their patients. And I think that's really exciting, to be in this like evolutionary stage and to help kind of carve that pathway. And it's been a journey. I will tell you that when I started my career over 15 years ago, everyone looked at me like I had lost my marbles that I was going to do this as a family medicine clinician. And now no one even blinked twice at me today. And so I think that it's just really cool to see that we actually get to contribute to the evolution of how medicine is practiced. So Brian.
Yeah, I think it's so exciting to see what's going on. I think historically genetics has been primarily like a research field, whereas a lot of like my senior mentors have like had PhD backgrounds, worked in a basic laboratory. I think that has shifted in the past 5 to 10 years, where it's a lot more clinically focused now, where there's a lot more people that focus on just seeing patients and providing clinical care. And what's nice about that is when you see that transition happening, you see the research also shift to more clinical research and more translational medicine. And that's what's so exciting, is how much studies are being done and new therapies are becoming available. So that's where I work with a lot of the clinical trials. And there are so many conditions that were devastating in the past, and now we actually have therapies. And so it's so rewarding to see that you can make a difference for these families, that you can, and not just diagnose them, which there's a lot of value in a diagnosis by itself, but when there's also a therapy that you can provide, it's really amazing. And then just the availability of genetic testing in general has really, it used to be so niche, only for a select, few people that had access, and now we're doing genetic testing all across the board. And with newborn screening, we're expanding the newborn screen to include so many more conditions, which is really helping people get therapy and treatment earlier. So just therapeutics in general, I think, is amazing. Gene therapy, we're doing clinical trials on it. It has so much potential, and if we figure it out and do it well, it's hard to even imagine how that will shift things.
Well, I just want to end by thanking you all for sharing your perspectives, your journeys. I am really excited by the work that you're all doing, your career paths, and I hope it was helpful for those who attended. Just as a reminder, 2 more panels on the 16th and 23rd. We welcome you to attend those. We will post the recordings on the ClinGen site, so you're welcome to watch those after today. And this is our 3rd year doing this panel, and we do seek feedback after the end of the series. You'll see that in your emails. It's helpful for us planning for future years. So with that, thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our attendees. Have a lovely rest of your afternoon. And thanks again.